term, creator
There you
enablement.
go, creator enablement. Steal it. IP starting today. Trademark. I think that is the way that you diversify risk. Because
And how do I do it in a way that honors the investment of blood, sweat, and tears?
Are we considered geriatric millennials? Is that what we
You
are?
know what? Legacy building mode, right? Like what?
What's going on, everybody? Mike and Gario here with Marketing Adjacent, and we're chatting AI today. Gario, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I gotta say, man, this idea of simulcasting across like 4 different platforms is actually pretty wild. But I digress. The way that we're kicking this off is framed. The framing is the writer strike, right? So I think when we've had the conversation about AI in the past, you and I, right? We've been at this a lot longer than the general population, especially like the white collar workforce, if you will. And I think the writer strike brought a lot of the questions and anxiety around it to the forefront, right? Because people for the first time could see it directly impacting things beyond just the theory of it, right? Their favorite TV show got canceled or paused. I think writers are uniquely skilled, and rightfully so, of framing problems in interesting ways, right? So a lot of the narrative surrounding AI's impact on humanity and our creative endeavors or white collar work in general was really well done during the strike. And obviously there's the whole, labor versus capital, issue, right? So when the writer strike ended, I think and people started to read the terms that they had, a lot of people went directly to the compensation piece of it, right? Like, what are they actually getting in terms of pay? And that's a whole different debate. Scott Galloway has a lot of thoughts on that. But the other part that they talked about was the concessions that they got from AI, right? And the article that sparked this, that we are going to throw in the show notes, worth checking out, pointed out that what happened with the actor strike or the writer strike is going to start impacting the business world, right? Just in general. And I took some notes here around the things that are worth kind of exploring. So the first is, who owns the intellectual property, right? Like, it's my idea as a writer. What does that mean in terms of a studio's ability to take my work and monetize it in ways that I did not give permission to? So that's one, right? The second thing was they tried to get concessions around. They didn't want the studios using it without their permission, but they also wanted the ability to use it in their work, right? So writers wanted the ability to use it, but didn't want the studios taking the reading it into AI and then giving it back to them to edit, and compensating them for editing, not for the work. So they put a bunch of concessions in there around that. The The third thing that's interesting is how they framed it as writers need to learn how to use the tool and treat it as a tool, and the work product that of their using it is still what they should be compensated for, right? So the whole workflow around compensation for knowledge work completely gets upended, right? So I think that might be a good place to kind of set the stage for that is, the in a as white collar workers or knowledge workers, if we do think about it as a tool, how should we be thinking about approaching leveraging it for work going forward? And yeah, I don't think they have a very clear answer around it. And I think that might be a good place to kick it off. Like, what is with AI here to stay? Because nobody can put their head in the sand anymore and go, okay, this thing's not is not going to affect me and my work. But then the question then becomes, how do you use it and still use it to enhance the work that you produce and not have it replace you? So with that stage, your thoughts?
Man, I've got a lot of thoughts. I think it's definitely can't put the head in the sand. I mean, there's been a bunch of stuff that's come out recently, right? I think was it the McKinsey study where they showed a clear improvement in efficiency with people who didn't versus didn't use it. That's when I think that was across their entire organization, right? So that's all of, I think it was McKinsey. We'll need to double check that. Across all their knowledge work or whatnot. And I don't remember what their sample size was and all that jazz. There's there's a bunch of articles and stuff that's come out on coding in terms of engineers being able to put out more lines of code and cleaner lines of code with versus without, all this kind of stuff. So I haven't seen any quantitative stuff about writers or creators or whatnot. I'm sure there's probably something out there. But the point is yeah, you definitely, like, if you're a knowledge worker, you can't put your head in the sand and think this is not going to impact you somehow. I like your model of looking at it as a thought partner. Personally, I every time we've talked about it, I come back to that I like that framing of it. But the thing I come back to pretty consistently when I think about this is, where's the value, and is the value, like, is the efficiency gain actually worth it? So, and this is, I'd love to hear from, there's a couple people watching live. I mean, feel free to pop your comments once I say it, if you're watching after the fact too. But, like, let's say that this allows writers, and let's take that example, so that's where we started, to be more efficient. Okay. And one potential output of that is we have less expensive shows and movies and whatever, which in theory would mean that we can produce, not we, but the Hollywood we can produce more content. Do we really need more content? I don't know. Like, is that actually a net positive for the market? Like, do we really need it? I mean, and the model I'm looking at it in is like, if you look at social content as a proxy for this, like creator content, I mean, the deluge of stuff out there is just nuts right now. It's only going to get worse. the noise is increasing by the minute, probably. And you can make the argument that overall this is maybe raising the bar over time, right? Or raising the quality bar because it's so easy to come in. But is it really doing that enough? And if so, is this really a net positive for us? And that's the part where I don't know. Like, I'm thinking simply of like basic, macroeconomic theory of supply and demand. If all this does is increase the supply, then the price in theory goes down for the thing. Do we really need that? I don't know. Like, I'm struggling with that because then this gets us into this, content wise, into this whole thing of ad supported models and et cetera, et cetera. So what are people actually paying? I think actually next week we'll do an episode on the ad supported models. A lot of interesting stuff happening there, but like, what are people actually paying for, and is it worthwhile? Like that's the part I struggle with. I don't know that I have an answer, honestly. Like, and this is coming from like, are we using this in our consulting practice? Yeah, we are. And, I think we talked about it last time around in terms of how we're using it. And actually, maybe even more specifically, let's look at marketers and content creators that create content, not for themselves for a living necessarily even, but for other people. So let's talk about podcast agencies. Okay. This makes podcast production much faster, and it's only going to improve. So then the value of the production itself decreases because anybody can do it over time, right? With the help of AI. So then we end up with even more podcasts than we have right now. At what point does that oversaturation decrease the value of each incremental podcast in marketing, right? And does that just go away because of that, right? Because there is this, very clear inverse relationship between saturation and effectiveness. So as whatever, and this is for anything, like if this increases social content, the effectiveness of each individual social post decreases. If this increases the volume of podcasts out there, the effectiveness of each podcast episode or podcast entity decreases. Videos, images, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So does this just turn into the race to the bottom for this kind of thing? And is this not where the value really lies? I answered your question with a question.
Yeah. And I think that question of, is it valuable, I think is the one that we make a lot of sense to spend some time unpacking, because, when you look at, if you break down the cost of the production of a show, right? Let's just use the writers as an example, and then I'll bring it back to like sales. The time that's spent for a writer is they're sitting in a room and they're ideating, they're bouncing ideas off each other, right? And they're trying to come up with interesting concepts and so on. But there's still an opportunity cost of sitting down in that room, locked away, and not out experiencing the world, getting new ideas as inputs to come in, right? So if we think about it through the lens of what I say, of time spent in each phase of the creative process, then I think the ability to, and again, I'm totally making this up here, but you have 4 writers, right? And they're sitting in a room and they are engaging, bouncing ideas off each other. And if each of those writers could spend some time doing that work, that ideation, using a tool like AI that does not require them to, doesn't get tired, doesn't need a lunch break, doesn't, He's available 24 hours a day. They can come to that writer's room way more prepared, which reduces that time. So more time can be spent creating content and coming up with ideas and outside in the world getting the inspiration that's needed to bring their best ideas to the writing room. You fast forward to switching gears to like sales. And this is something that I'm super excited about for young sales reps and founders that are selling, right? And just small business owners in general. The biggest part of the hardest part of sales is overcoming objections, right? And nurturing an opportunity through the close. And if more time can be spent because of AI, streamlining communication, streamlining the notes that you're putting, creating context for the emails that you've sent and gone back and forth on, and more time can be spent being human, and getting the information that you need to help someone overcome objections. Like my big thing right now that I think, I don't know how long it's going to be a value add, but before everybody starts doing it, is creating memos for your champion to bring to the leadership team. So the ask is not, hey, schedule a meeting with all your team members and me. It's, I've heard everything that you've told me. We've been able to spend time together because AI is helping me be more efficient with other parts of my day. So I'm spending more time with you as a human being. Now I'm able to take that information and give it to you in a way that all you have to do as my champion is put it on the agenda, right? And I can then take all the conversations we've had and give you, I like the Amazon 6-page framework as the memo format, but now AI can help me write that memo. But the input for that information has to come from me as a human being, and has to come from conversations I've had with that person, knowing that the CFO would rather bring it in-house. So we got to address that in here. The marketing person is going to feel threatened by, if we come in and say this. So that's not what you're trying to do. So let's make sure that we, make that clear. There's a cost of working with us versus somebody else. Let's make sure that we help them understand what that looks like. So you're able to frame the debate that's taking place in that meeting. AI is giving you the time to do the work to make that content that's being created way more effective. And I think that that's the way people need to start thinking about it. Is it's a tool that can be used to make the process better, but in order to do that, you have to deconstruct the process and figure out where the value in the whole value chain really lies and optimize for that.
Yes, there's actually a good comment that came in. I'll put it up here. We're pretty much talking about what does AI do, right? I think what you're describing, and this is why I like your model of, or your framing of it as a thought partner. And where I struggle is, like, I agree with you on to a certain extent, where, like, let's take the podcasting example I was talking about. In theory, you can make the argument, if you can remove the need and decrease the cost of production, that means that you can spend more time on the strategy and the activation and the use of the asset, right? And you can make that better. On the flip side of that, though, is there, some people are going to follow the quality path. Some people will follow, well, I can just do more now. And the question for me becomes, like, depending on where it's being used and for what, there is a natural, I think, limit to how much of a thing is needed, right? They get content is one, widgets is another, whatever, right? Like, whatever. I'm trying to think of an example that's, at some point, like, I mean, look at fast fashion as an example, right? There's a reason why probably still are in hot water around, burning excess inventory and stuff, because it's cheaper to burn it than to keep it, right? And just write it off. So there's only so much clothing that the world ever needs based on the population. I don't know that the answer is any different to a certain extent when it comes to content. The question kind of becomes, well, can you always get better? And I have to assume that there's a limit to the better at some point. So like, okay, how far does this take us, and what's the value? I guess is what I keep coming back to. But at the same time, I do agree that I think that the right move is using it to elevate the work being done. So spending more time on that higher level human work that, at least as of right now, for the reason that Edward just mentioned, is not really where it's at, right? Because it's not creating net new ideas per se. It's combining existing stuff into a new amalgamation potentially, where it's predicting what the next thing is, really, right? It's a giant prediction machine. So, yeah, I don't know that we answered the question, but my whole thing is like, still like how valuable is it, and where that value is.
Yeah, I think, I like the Eddie's point here of like, it's a tool to add to the communicator's toolbox, right? So if you're a writer, and there's a guy, David Perel, I think I'll see if I can find his thing. But he was talking with Mark Andreessen. So he has a podcast that's about how writers write. And it was interesting to hear. He's interviewed a bunch of different writers, prolific writers, and it's about their process, right? But they're all known for writing very different things, right? So Mark Andreessen, there's one guy that tweets every day, and it was like, how do you write your tweet threads, and how do you use AI to edit your content? But it's still his ideas, and he's doing tweet threads. Mark Andreessen, on the other hand, he spends a lot of time researching and outlining and writing his ideas down on paper, and then he uses AI to edit what is there, as a part of his editing process. So the volume in which he's producing doesn't change, but the time that he's spending thinking and talking with people and interviewing and like forming his thoughts around it completely got, like, the time he can spend doing that extended exponentially because he's using these tools. It's the same like and he gave this example in his talk, audiobooks versus regular books, right? So if you're reading a regular book, and in air quotes regular book, you have to carve out the time, block the time off, and you maybe can read in an hour increments once a week to really sit down, open a book, crack it open, and actually like thumb through it. If you think about it on the flip side, where it's an audiobook, like I listen to books like 1.5 speed, and I probably listen to the same book like 3 or 4 times before I fully form an opinion about the book, right? There's no way, like running a business, being a parent, and trying to be a present partner to my wife, there's no way I could have read that many books. But now the ideas, which is the point of reading the books, I now have those insights and those ideas. So it's kind of the same thing, right? Like it's like email. Yeah, I could write a a penned memo to you and send it, and wait for you to receive it and pen a response back and have it come back to me via carrier pigeon, or we can go back and forth via text message, right, or via email.
But
So
how cool
again,
would it
like,
be to have a carrier pigeon deliver something to your door today?
I honestly, like, it's funny when I said it, I'm like, what's the old school way of email? It's like carrier pigeon.
I mean, well, I mean, it depends how old school, right? Or snail mail,
Right.
right? But I mean, it is still nice to get a handwritten note every once in a while, though.
It's true. So it stands out when you do it. Oh,
So there's, I mean, here's the interesting. So Eddie's really engaged here. So you got your analogy you threw out at, you know, you can build a house with nails, but it goes faster with a nail gun.
yep, yep.
I agree. However, I don't love the analogy. Here's
How
why.
so?
Because we all like, at least in America, I don't know enough about other parts of the world, to be honest, but I'd be willing to bet other parts of the world too. We have a housing shortage and homes are too damn expensive, right? So anything we can do to bring the costs down is a good thing. Obviously, nail guns are not really what we're talking about. You know, it's like 3D printed homes or whatever, all this kind of stuff. I think that if you look at basic macroeconomic principles, there's still plenty of supply to be had if we can make it, especially and bring the price down. I struggle to see that on the content side of things. I mean, yeah, I guess you can make the argument, well, if we can make shows cheaper, than maybe Netflix doesn't need to raise their subscription pricing. Maybe. I don't know that really solves it, because I don't know that makes enough of a difference in the model. Maybe it does. I don't know. But
Well,
because I don't know. Not the writing, maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, Gary. It seems like you might disagree with me.
well, it's not that I disagree. I'm thinking of like, so I actually really like the analogy of the nail gun, and the reason why it's resonating with me from the content production and Netflix standpoint, the example that you gave is before the last time there was a writer strike, if I remember correctly, there was like scripts that people would make about like big movies, right? And it was very, you had to check a lot of boxes before you would even risk like putting a movie out there, right? Like director has to be on point. Like it was a huge risk for theaters, or because you had to market it, you had to put it out in theaters, and it had to hit a certain amount before it became like worthwhile. So there's a lot of ideas and shows that wouldn't make the light of day because it was too risky and it was an unknown. You fast forward to Netflix, and what's the show with that was the big blockbuster for
Their
Netflix?
first one, House of Cards.
House of Cards, right? Like that would have been shelved. That would never have made it to TV. But now there's more variety to choose from. Therefore, but again, that's a volume game. Like there had to be more. The nail gun, there had to be more things produced for people to see what worked and what didn't work, and it becomes this flywheel effect. But I hear you.
How much more do we need? Is because even like the other example we could look at more modern times, right, is Amazon. I mean, Amazon's whole idea is the long tail. Like, hey, they're talking about books. Like, yeah, when you're in a bookstore and you have physical shelf space that limits you, you have to try to find the winners, because you can't take the risk of giving shelf space to something that's not going to sell. Digital shelf space, who cares? Like, yeah, well, even if I can get 10 people to buy this book, cool, whatever. I don't lose anything for it. I mean, it's not exactly like that, but sort of. But I mean, look at Amazon right now. I mean, there's so much crap there that now you've got a whole other problem of, knockoffs and all this other stuff they've created because of that model. I mean, how much more stuff does the world need? right? I think that's where I just keep coming to,
Right.
like, I feel like there's a natural ceiling for everything. And I'm not saying
Yeah,
we've
and
hit it necessarily. I'm just questioning how far away from it are we with some of this stuff.
yeah, I wonder if we're gonna have to evolve as a society to catch up to the unforeseen consequences of this model, right? Like the even the whole point of the writer strike, to begin with, was the work that was being created was they expected to be compensated a certain amount, right? But there's so much content that was available that the cost should have, like, just natural selection should have gone down. So there was a disconnect between the writers and the what they expected, and the you know same thing happened with photographers, right? Like, hey, I'm going to license my work to you. Think about my wife's and I's wedding, right? We didn't own the rights to our photos. They picked the photos and they gave it to us in a nicely bound book. And I think it was like 2 years or something like that, some weird deal where we could then purchase the rights to our photos from them after the fact. That sounds absolutely crazy now, right? But I bet that same company, they don't do that anymore because the market has demanded something different. So I feel like the market, bringing it back to kind of all beyond Hollywood and how it's going to affect everything else, is we're going to have to figure out as society, like, where do we want to place value, and based on that value, how are we going to compensate the people that are creating that value. And I
Yeah.
think we're still in that debate phase right now of, like, what is AI? Is it a tool? Is it stealing my intellectual property? Is it a new way of communicating? Is it a assistant? The article that we were looking at, they called it a coworker. Like, what is it? And I don't think we've defined that as a society yet, but it's a question that everybody is asking now because it's now entered the public consciousness, which I actually think is a good thing. Net positive.
I would agree. The one last interesting thing to note is, like, the precedent that this writer strike sets, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they have created a limit to how much this can impact, writer pay and things like that. Does this bleed over into our world of marketing? Like, do ghostwriters get to take advantage of this? Do marketers get to take advantage of it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, well, you can't replace me with a AI social media writer or whatever. I don't know. Like, like, I'm curious to see. I don't think it's going to go that route because I don't know what. I'm not sure exactly whether that would hold up in, like, from a legal perspective, but I could see that being a question at least people are asking,
Mm-hmm.
because self-preservation is something we're all hardwired to do,
Yeah. I don't know. I think the thing that is exciting about it for me is it allows people to advance much faster. So if I'm a junior employee fresh out of college and I can prompt an AI, I'm going to use OpenAI as an example because that's the popular one, but even Microsoft, with Copilot and all that, like, if I can go from a junior and start to produce the work product of a senior person because I have AI as my coach with company data, and I can essentially replicate one-on-ones and a year's worth of coffees with my CFO, teaching me how to think about revenue, like, instead of and this is me throwing in some geriatric millennial shade at the Gen Zs among us here. Like, instead of playing Roblox, actually, that's not a good example. But anyway, whatever the kids do these days, if I'm spending time doing leveraging and learning, spending my downtime actually exploring new ideas and learning versus empty calorie consumption on the internet, how does that increase the velocity of my career trajectory, right? And I think about what that means for people who choose the traditional career path, but startup founders, right? Like, if you can accelerate your path to profitability, basically coach yourself to a certain degree, right? To becoming a 10x founder, like that's a pretty big deal. So again, I don't know where it's going to net out, but I think it's going to be net positive if we're intentional about, to your point, like there is parts of it that's just pointless, right? Auto-generating mass email marketing, that's a net negative, right? That's not helping anyone. Freeing yourself up to quickly communicate with intention, that's a net positive. And I think we're going to have to make that distinction as the professional world going forward.
I think that is as good a place as any to stop. Positive outlook, everybody. Thank you all for joining. The few of you that joined us live, appreciate it. Leave us a review, leave a comment. All the regular iTunes and Spotify and YouTube channels and LinkedIn, etc. So other than that, we'll see you all next week. And actually, I think we've got our topic picked out, which is we'll talk about ad-supported models unless something else more interesting comes up.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
We'll see y'all next week.
I feel like we should do more of these.